What does the phrase the end of the world mean? Does it mean the end of society for human beings? The end of the life on this planet? Or the end of the planet itself? What do we think of when we think of the end of the world? What do we picture? Maybe it's the nuclear apocalypse of Terminator 2, or one of the many disasters which have befallen the films of Roland Emmerich. In this case, the end of the world is a cataclysmic event ending all life on the planet, a moment in time that renders the earth uninhabitable. But is that really how the world will end? Is that what we should expect? As the climate continues to change, and as society moves deeper and deeper into its fringe online communities, the end of the world seems to be, more realistically, a great fracturing between the physical spaces in which we live and the digital ones in which we escape that dying world. Films like The Matrix and Ready Player One posit an apocalypse of a sort. The world doesn't end in a literal sense, but instead the societies in which we live decay to a point of no return. These films, all of them, feature protagonists who actively try to save the world, who see it happen in front of them and work toward saving it. But that's not how the world will end. This is. The Tyrion Horse is Hungarian filmmaker Bela Tarr's final film. Released in 2011, The Turin Horse stands as a conclusion to the work of a filmmaker whose movies became increasingly apocalyptic over the course of his filmography. Photographed in stark black and white, featuring long stretches without dialogue, and including almost no elements of what we would consider a traditional narrative, The Tyrion Horse isn't a typical film about the end of the world. In fact, it's not about the end of the world at all. Instead, The Tyrion Horse takes place in 1889, in what it claims to be is the Italian countryside. In the world of this film, society has not necessarily collapsed. Aliens haven't destroyed the major metropolitan areas. Nuclear war has not decimated the population. The villages haven't been ravaged by zombies. Climate change hasn't robbed humanity of its resources. No, it's just a family living on a farm. So what makes it perhaps the truest cinematic depiction of the end of the world? For the last few years, my own anxieties about climate change have reached heightened levels of desperation. Books like The Uninhabitable Earth and A Farewell to Ice posit that climate change won't eradicate the planet of all life all at once, but that instead there will be a slow thinning of life, where the worldly pleasures of being alive will disappear over the course of a century. To get the best view of what the future may look like, we only need to look to the past. Food cost, rather than the absolute absence of food, can often be the key factor in shortages and possible starvation. During the height of the Irish potato famine in 1845, Ireland was actually exporting food to England. The peasants starved because they could not afford to buy food at the local prices. Enhanced by the loss of the potato crop, there was enough food, in absolute terms, to keep everyone alive. They died because they had no money to buy it. A Farewell to Ice by Peter Wadhams. In a society where resources are increasingly hoarded by the wealthy class, and where the benefits of labor, like healthcare and food and shelter, are further paywalled by corporate interests, the climate is only part of the causes for our eventual societal collapse. The Tyrion Horse isn't just about people suffering due to an intemperate climate, but because of the immense pressure they feel to produce resources they themselves may never use. The film takes place ostensibly in Turin, Italy, where, allegedly, philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche suffered some sort of mental breakdown after witnessing a man whipping a horse. When Nietzsche witnesses this happening, he throws his arms around the neck of the horse to stop the whipping, goes home, and remains defeated and still for the last 10 years of his life. Though the film never explicitly reveals this information to the audience, viewers can infer that the titular Tyrion horse we see in this film is the same horse Nietzsche saved from punishment. The Tyrion Horse is made according to a set of rules director Bela Tarr developed over the course of his career. While his early films had a documentary aesthetic covering contemporary social issues, his later films began developing a formalism bordering on the aesthetic. His films became black and white tableaus, featuring long shots of figures moving from one place to another. Dialogue became scarce. Narrative became implied. To quote Bela Tarr, "At the beginning of my career, I had a lot of social anger. I just wanted to tell you how messed up society is. This was the beginning. Afterwards, I began to understand that the problems were not only social, they are deeper. I thought they were only ontological. It's so complicated, and when I understood more and more, when I went closer to the people, afterward, I could understand that the problems were not only ontological, they were cosmic. The whole messed up world is over. That's what I had to understand, and that's why the style has moved. Once I went down, I kept going down. The style became more and more downward, by the end becoming more simple, very pure. That's what was interesting for me, to discover something step by step." While arguably Tarr's most famous film, the 7-hour Satan Tango could also be read as an apocalyptic tale. The Tyrion Horse is perhaps the most pure vision of Tarr's cinematic talent. Consisting of only 30 shots throughout its 2.5-hour runtime, the Tyrion Horse is a masterpiece of social realism and an utterly claustrophobic look at one potential future for all human beings. While the film ostensibly takes place outside of Turin, Italy, it was shot in Hungary, and the landscape could not be more different from the lush Italian countryside. The farm in this film is a desolate place ravaged by windstorms. Everything for miles around is muddy and windblown. The farm is isolated from any city, and the shack and well and barn are all weather-beaten and lack any form of luxury. The world of these farmers is a hostile one. A neighboring farmer early in the film tells our protagonist that a nearby town has been destroyed by God. Tarr presents the landscape of this film as infertile and dead. Their horse, perhaps the only hope they have for a future, starts behaving erratically and sick. Over the course of the 6 days in which this film takes place, the Tyrion Horse slowly declines. On the 3rd day of the film, a group of Romani travelers steal water from the farmer's well, and when the farmers tell them to leave, they give a book to the daughter and promise to return for more water sometime in the future. But the next day, the well is dry. The Tyrion Horse asks the viewer to watch as resources are slowly taken, bit by bit, from a family of people who work desperately to stay alive in an apathetic world. But as the film continues, that apathy turns into downright hostility. Even though the Tyrion Horse takes place over 100 years in the past, the film operates more as a fable than anything else. However, unlike a fable, the characters have no real lesson to learn. They have no enemy to overcome. Instead, the world is just dying, and they are doing whatever they can to survive in it. While the film names Friedrich Nietzsche in its opening moments, there's another philosopher that comes to mind when I watch this film: Arthur Schopenhauer. An enormous influence for Nietzsche, German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer's work posits the benefits of asceticism. In his book, The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer states, "All happiness is of a negative rather than positive nature, and for this reason cannot give lasting satisfaction and gratification, but rather only ever release from a pain or lack, which must be followed either by a new pain or by languor, empty yearning and boredom. What better representation of this philosophy is there in all of cinema than watching the farmer and the Tyrion horse joylessly eat a daily potato? For Schopenhauer, worldly pleasures act as distractions to the triumph of a human being's ability to work through suffering and pain. To achieve something beautiful is to endure the miseries of life and still produce what we need to keep surviving. But in the hopeless struggle to endure, the farmers in this film yield no reward. The horse refuses to take the family to town when their well has dried up. It acts erratically. Like the weather itself, the horse is no longer a source of production. The family, in the final 2 days, must resign itself to the end. Darkness overtakes them. The world ends in silence. As David Wallace Wells points out in The Uninhabitable Earth, the increase of destructive weather is why some studying global warming call the 100 years to follow the century of hell. Climate change is fast, much faster than it seems we have the capacity to recognize and acknowledge, but it is also long, almost longer than we can truly imagine. The Tyrion Horse is a warning for how the future looks to the human race. Resources will dry up. Weather will alter our landscapes. The animals and technology we depend on will break or abandon us. And the luxuries of our lives, the happy moments which bring meaning to our lives, will be replaced by gauntlets of endurance. All that will be left, whenever that day comes, is silence.